Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Labour says if it wins the next election, it'll provide free school meals for every primary school pupil in England, and it will pay for them by charging VAT on private school fees. Jeremy Corbyn says it will improve the health and performance of young children, but critics say Labour's sums don't add up, as our correspondent Danny Savage reports.
School meals, a political hot potato which Labour is reheating.
Have you met the Prime Minister?
The Labour leader was at a holiday club in Lancashire talking about free school meals for state-educated primary-age children in England, paid for by adding VAT to private school fees.
What can be more important than making sure our children are properly fed? What can be more important than making sure our children grow up with a balanced diet and a reliable lunch every day they're in school?
It's the families of these private school pupils who will be paying for the initiative. A prospect which doesn't impress head teachers in the sector.
I think it's unworkable. I doubt if it would happen, but the thing is it wouldn't be just taxing the rich. These are the very people who are struggling to send their children into private education, paying twice through their taxes and making the choice of wanting excellence.
It costs £9,000 a year to send a child to this school. If Labour gets their way, a tax of 20% will be added to the bill, pushing up fees by £1,800. These two ladies have put 4 children through independent boarding schools. They are dismayed at Labour's plans and say the rise will price families out of the independent system.
Oh, it will make a huge difference for most people who are just about affording to send their children to private school. I honestly think that's the majority of people who do without holidays, they do without new cars.
I think that it will be a deal breaker for the majority of parents today. My own daughter is now sending her child to the same prep school that she went to, and I know full well that the majority of her friends will not be able to continue if they have to pay another 20%.
But there are those who support a tax on school fees.
Because I had children in private school, also had them in mainstream. And when we could afford it, yes, I wouldn't have minded paying for the people who couldn't.
Labour has pointed to research it claims shows that providing free school meals at primary level raises children's grades. But the actual researchers clarified their position today.
Our research showed that there was a positive academic benefit to having universal free school meals in deprived areas. It said nothing about whether it would have the same impact if you rolled it out nationally.
Labour says the tax could raise £1.5 billion a year. Danny Savage, BBC News, West Yorkshire.
The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, wants to extend free school meals to all primary school pupils in England and says he'd cover the cost by introducing VAT on private school fees. The proposal's being sold as a measure that will, in his view, improve the health of many young children by ending a subsidy to the privileged few. But would it have any direct effect on a child's performance in class? Laura McInerney is editor of Schools Week and a former teacher. She joins me here now with Henry Dimbleby, co-author of the school food plan and restaurant chain Leo. This is a pretty decent idea, this, Laura, isn't it? It's got to be something that can be seen to be helping kids.
Well, I think it's great that Jeremy Corbyn is looking at getting more money for schools. Schools are being really squeezed at the moment. So he's talking about £1 billion, and that's incredible. But there is a problem, which is that we've not got great data that shows that actually putting more money into meals for children makes that much difference to their outcomes. So you have to remember that children on low-income families already do get free meals. That would stay. But what he wants to do is add meals for children from middle-income and high-income families as well.
Just because we haven't got the data doesn't mean it isn't actually doing a lot of good.
Well, we don't know, and it's £1 billion. So the question is, if you have £1 billion, do you give that to children who mostly already have meals, or do you do something different with it?
Henry?
I mean, Laura was actually a head teacher in Newham when the trials that Ed Balls commissioned were run between 2009 and 2011. It's quite an interesting and complex result from the trials. First of all, the children in Key Stage 2 were almost a term ahead of expected as a result of this trial. There were other interventions going on, but when you talk to the head teachers, every single head teacher in Newham...
And these kids were the most deprived. They were the kids
the poorer kids. So what was interesting about it was that you gave the food to everyone, and the poorer children did better. They were the ones who improved the most. And when you spoke to the head teachers, every head teacher in Newham said it improved the morale, the behaviour and the cohesion of the school. We talked to...
But you're not actually contradicting what Laura says then, which is it might help the very poorest, but it doesn't necessarily have the same effect on kids that come from wealthy backgrounds.
The point about it is that in order to help the poorest, you have to have the universal benefit.
Why?
There was another trial in Wolverhampton because it's about not only the chemical process of the food making them not sleep in the afternoon, it's about the cohesion of having the whole school eating together and working together that creates the...
That makes sense, doesn't it, Laura? It's a sort of context.
It does. There is a slight problem, which is, as you mentioned, I was a teacher in Newham at the time, but as you mentioned, there was lots going on. So we had many, many interventions, and the authors of the report who looked into this said themselves, yes, there was an increase in children's achievement, but actually we don't know that it was down to the food. And we've just had no further trials, even though currently under sevens in this country do get free meals. We've not done proper trials and testing.
I think that's good. First of all, the head teachers, not only the data, but the head teachers said it was a good idea. There were other interesting benefits. So, for example, the amount of crisps people ate went down by 18%. Fizzy drinks went down by 18%. Sandwiches, which are terrible for you, went down by 27%. But I do agree with Laura that the data, we have had now, Clegg introduced universal free school meals on the back of support from Gove and Balls.
Yeah, and then the Tories got rid of it, presumably.
No, it's still here. It's still there. The infant free school meals is still in for 5 to 7-year-olds.
But not above that,
But not above that.
Not
but
for the rest of the
that hasn't been measured as well as it might be measured.
So why wouldn't you then listen to a teacher? I mean, you know, given that Laura has worked so directly at the head of a school with children of all this age, why wouldn't you take on board that it's not...
We visited 60 schools as part of the plan. I've listened to lots of teachers. I've talked to school children. But I think we agree in certain areas. So I think we agree that in terms of the rollout of it, I would look at those boroughs that have high free school meals percentages as the place to start, rather than a
But you would really say, actually, you know, as a head teacher in this sector, you wouldn't spend the money here.
So I was a teacher. I do want to say I wasn't a head teacher. I was a teacher. But no, I saw what I saw in Newham actually was really impressive, and I agreed at the time. I thought it was fantastic. But I was then reporting on this when we were seeing the rollout across the country nationally, and what I suddenly realised was the deprived parts of London where this was piloted is not the same as everywhere else in the country, and you suddenly saw primary schools where loads of children already had food, everything was fine, they didn't have the kitchens to deliver it, so money was poured into schools to do their kitchens up. You then had children who already had food given more money, and in the meantime, the pupils who I'd been teaching back in East London, who were coming in without breakfast, who over half term don't get lunches, aren't getting anything. So if I've got £1 billion and I'm Jeremy Corbyn, I have to think to myself very seriously, do I give that money to a child who doesn't have breakfast and doesn't have lunch in half term, or do I give it to a child in some school where they're already got their lunch?
I think there are lots of things you could spend money on in schools. I would also spend it on breakfast. I think you could move more money from... One of the things Michael Gove did very well is protect the education budget. It's the most important thing. Do this and those things. And I think you'll see our children grow up not only better but healthier.
Thank you both very much. And I promoted you. You must be a head chef as well, just to even it out.